Hi, welcome to UI Analysis and Optimization. In this section, we are going to discuss the UI thread as a whole, view hierarchies, how to debug your layout with the Layout Inspector, and using developer options to get more info on your UI. UI thread as a whole. In this video, we are going to discuss what is the UI thread, running tasks on background threads, and checking which thread you are on. In the previous section, we discussed a little bit about running tasks on background threads. We looked at async tasks, and we looked at the thread object that we used to go to the background thread and back over to the UI thread. Now, this video will focus a little bit more on the UI thread as opposed to running tasks on the background thread. So the first thing we should know about the UI thread is that the UI thread is essentially anything that has to do with your UI. So any user clicks or anything that's displayed on the device is running on the UI thread. So all of this that's happening here, all these lists that are rendering, any clicks, this sliding, if you fling, all of that is stuff that happens on the UI thread. And for that reason, as we discussed, we try to keep any heavy computations or any heavy tasks at all, such as network tasks or database tasks, we try to keep them on a background thread, such as a new thread or an async task. Okay, now you might be wondering to yourself, well, what if I'm not sure where my code is being run? Let's say you have a lot of code that calls a lot of methods. So for example here, let's just make a thread. And since we're in Kotlin, we're not using the new keyword, of course. And inside our thread, we're going to pass in a runnable. We saw this piece of code in the previous section, but we only saw it in Java. So here it is in Kotlin. And here I'm just going to add some code so that I can have a breakpoint. Okay, so I'm going to put a breakpoint here, and I want to know which thread I'm running when I'm inside this code. And will I be on the UI thread or will I be on a background thread? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to debug my code and I'll let it run. And once it starts running, the debugger should open up here and we'll take a look at where we can find out which thread we're on. Okay, so the debugger attached, and here we go. Okay, so the first thing we see here is that we have a little box on the left here called debugger. And that opens up, of course, in the debug tab here at the very bottom. And you'll find a drop-down list here. And this drop-down list is a list of your threads. The way you know which thread you're on is the very top one here says thread 2. So thread 2 is not the main thread. How do we know that? Because the main thread, or the UI thread, is called main. Okay, so here we know we're on thread 2. Now, let's set a breakpoint a little bit higher up and see which thread we're on now. Here, we're expected to be on the main thread, or the UI thread. And the reason for that is that we are in onCreate. All the callback methods in Android for the activity or for a fragment are always invoked on the UI thread. So here that we have a breakpoint here, we see that now we're on main at 10.638 in group main running. So you don't have to worry about this at 10.638. And the group is main, that's just the group of threads that you're in. Again, that's not super important right now. And running just means that you're on a running thread. That's expected since you're running code on that thread right now. There are some other states that a thread can be in. So wait, for example, you see here they're all in either wait or running. You can take a course or even just read a book about thread management and multi-threading in software to learn more about the possible states that a thread can be in. But the important thing for us here is that we're on the main thread. So if we're on main, we know that we're on the UI thread. So that's how you can tell if you're on the UI thread or not. You can set a breakpoint, and here, check the top one, or you can go to the Threads tab here, and you'll see you're either on main or you're on something else. If you're on main, you're on the UI thread. If you're on anything else, you're not on the UI thread. Now let's say we have a bunch of different threads here, and we want to give our thread a name so that we can be able to manage our different threads. So if you're running a thread object like this, you can simply pass in a second parameter after the runnable, and you can give it a string, and this will be the name of your thread. So here, this will be the name of your thread. So here I'm going to call it my cool thread. Okay, so let's set our breakpoint in here again, and let's run our application so that it stops in here. And this time, we're expecting the name of the thread to be my cool thread. Okay, there it is, my cool thread. So now that we know for a fact that this is the thread that we're in based on the name. Now, one final thing we want to look at in this video is, well, what if we want to add some debug code? Where can we get the name of the thread that we're in? If we want to add logs into our code so that once we're running a complex computation, for example, we want to know which thread we're in at any given time. Doing that is very simple. To do that, you simply make your log statement. So our tag will be main activity, and our message will be I am in thread, and then we will pass in, you invoke thread, so you call the thread class statically, so you don't need to create a thread object to do this, and then you say dot current thread and then dot name. If you are running Java, this would be thread.currentThread brackets dot get name if you're on Java. But since we're using Kotlin, we can use the direct accessor here. Okay? Now let's run this and take a look at what we see. This time we're just going to run it. We won't call the debugger. And here we're going to filter out our logcat to be I am in thread so that we can see which thread we're on. Great. It stopped here and it said I am in thread, my cool thread. So there you have it. That's how you can find which thread you're on at any given point in your code. We can run this very same code just so you can see the difference, and we'll put that code here, which is expected to be on the main thread, and let's see if it in fact displays the correct threads that we're on in each state. Okay, so first here it says I am in thread main, and then once it goes into this thread object, it says I am in thread my cool thread. Great. Now we know how to figure out which thread we're on at any given point in time in our code.